fear. Some might say that a lot of people who decide to speak publicly or preach have a lot of fear in them. That's probably true. But I had to think this week, or what is the couple times in my life that I have experienced true fear? Something that's so gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching, soul-wrenching, that I wasn't sure I could come back to reality kind of fear. And there's two examples I want to share with you. One is one that I'll never forget, and I know most of you, when you hear it, will understand why. And the other one I've never forgotten, and it's pretty funny. So we'll do the serious and then the funny. The serious was 2 years ago in 2 weeks when Dante had a seizure. I couldn't even remember to put shoes on as I was trying to go out to the ambulance. I was so distraught with fear. Many of you don't know the whole story, but I went to bed with him that night. It was Mary Clyde's funeral day. We'll never forget this day. If the choir remembers, the week prior he had projectile vomited in the sanctuary, by the way. These things you don't forget. Fear does that to you. And so at 10:30 at night, all of a sudden I wake up because Dante's kicking me, and we had fallen asleep together. It had been a long day, and I knew my parents were coming down to visit. And I'm like, no, you're not waking up. No. I was mad. That's another emotion that gets you going, doesn't it? And all of a sudden I realized he was kind of kicking in a rhythm, and I thought he was having a bad dream. But I couldn't get him to wake up. And at that point, my body just lost it, probably. I was calm because he was breathing. So I pick him up, and I'm rocking him a little bit, and I'm kind of looking around and wondering what to do. I'm a little fuzzy. I'd fallen asleep and wasn't sure if my parents had gotten there yet because they were coming after she worked a night shift. And so I run out into the hall, and nobody's in their bedroom, but I hear the shower. At this point, I'm like fight or flight kind of syndrome, And no, I can't find anybody. So I run downstairs with him and see my dad, and I remember saying to my dad, now you can't go get upset. You have to hold it together because I'm getting ready to lose it. And I said, he won't wake up, and I handed him to him. And that's the last rational thing I did. He seized for over 15 minutes. This wasn't just a little shake. I tell you what, though, I stayed pretty much together until my mother got down from the shower, which was her greatest fear as a mom, that she'd be in the shower when one of her children needed her. So she lived her greatest fear that night. And when she started praying out loud, Jesus, take me, not him, I thought I was going to lose it because we were timing things at that point. And they put him on the floor and they carry him out, still seizing. That's fear. And I don't tell you that to have sympathy for me because obviously he's fine. But have you ever felt that kind of fear? I will never forget it. You know that. I think about it all the time when I think of someone else's child that's hurting. When I see the world hurting, it reminds me of how much I hurt when my child was hurting. Fear does things to us. So let's laugh a little bit, okay, folks? Because I got to get through this. Between my voice and fear, it's not going to work if we stay in this moment. So when I was about 12, 13, 14, I'm not exactly sure. I was still into pink quite a bit. Actually, I've loved pink most of my life. And I had painted my room. We got permission from the church to paint my room. It was their parsonage, right? Bubblegum pink. And we painted it, and I was all excited, and I put all my posters back up, back in the day when you're a teenager and you got everybody's poster from albums and different kinds of things. Loved Rick Springfield and Duran Duran and Aha and things like that nobody knows these days. And it's okay. It's great. And I had a little museum to Springfield at one time and even set up things so that you had to walk through my room. Yeah, it was all cute. And so one day my dad was taking Jennifer to church camp. And of course I was old enough to stay home alone, and I'm like, I'll be fine. Now I remind you, I've always been a scaredy cat. But I'm like, I'll be fine. It's all this daytime. It's going to be great, right? I'll have the day alone. I'll sleep late. These are the days when you could still sleep to 12 or 1 and everything. It was all great. And all of a sudden, I'm woken up from my wonderful sleep with this awful noise. And I swore someone was trying to break in the house. So I throw the comforter over my head, pillow thing, comforter, right? And I'm like shaking, hyper aware, sun shining through my room, no other noise for the next hour or so that I can't get myself to get out of my bed. And then the noise happens again. I'm like, what is that noise? But I mean, I'm laughing now. But then I was in fear and trepidation. I really thought someone was just gradually creeping closer to me, just taunting me. Of course, that was not rational. So all of a sudden, I finally decide I'm going to peek out a little bit, right? I'm listening, I'm peeking. But of course, you know, the whole time I'm moving in my bed, it's like no, somebody knows I'm here under this comforter. Finally, let's get to the end of this. I just throw that comforter off, and I look around, and of course, no one's there. One of my posters was falling off the wall. Seriously, one of the crazy posters that were my prized possessions that I should have no fear of, simply coming off the wall. What are we afraid of? But I'm telling you, that fear response is the same. I mean, I remember how I felt in that moment to this day, and that was 30 years ago. What does fear do to us? And I bring this up because now I'm going to have some fear and trepidation, because I don't normally get up here, first of all, and talk a lot of personal things. I mean, I share them, and I'm happy to talk about personal things. I just don't find it necessary to do it every Sunday. And I also don't often get up and preach about racism or reconciliation or the racial tensions that go on in the world. I just don't do it very often. And I admit that part of it is out of fear. I did not choose to marry a black man to be the poster child for anti-racism. Can I make that statement honestly? I didn't. I didn't have a mixed child so that I could be a poster child for how the world can be perfect. It was never part of the equation of why I did what I did. So to get up here and have to talk about it becomes very difficult. Because I'm not the expert. Yes, I've had the anti-racism, pro-reconciliation training that our region offers, that our denomination offers actually. I took it in Indianapolis. Yes, I've been a counselor at Bridge Builder Camp, which is a camp that brings all youth together, the different races, to talk about race and the world and the systems. I've done all that. But I've always believed that really what it comes down to is changing hearts. Unfortunately, I've grown up, and I've realized it's not just about our hearts. And that's probably the part that I fear the most, is talking about how I can look around and be quite sure that every one of you has a loving heart that would never want to hurt anyone. And yet you live in a system of privilege. I live in a system of privilege that we don't even understand, that we don't even know. Connie and I were talking yesterday, and I'm not going to say anything necessarily that you said, but I put something out on Facebook. It's nothing I made up, somebody else made it up, and talking about the difference between equality and justice, because really what this is about isn't equality. The whole term back in the 60s of making things equal wasn't what it was about. Equality means that everybody gets the same thing, right? Everybody gets the purple sucker. You gotta keep it light. Well, not everybody needs a sucker. Some people can't have the sugar, but besides that, when we look at justice, it's making sure that people get what they need. Now that equation becomes quite complicated because there's a difference between what people need and what they want. There's a difference between giving somebody something that is going to help and what they want to take 10 things of. Building into the equation how people are going to respond or what they're going to do to get justice can't be part of the equation. Because when we talk about biblical justice, not equality, biblical justice, it's about God being present in every person, giving every person what they need, meeting people where they are. It means that somebody can walk through our doors and never been to church before. Somebody can walk through the doors and have a seminary education. And yet, in this moment, God meets each of us. Of course, I believe, as you know, that God meets us anywhere, everywhere, all the time. But in this moment, if you want to talk about our little sacred space, the justice is that God doesn't pick and choose, and God doesn't say, I'm only going to give you this, so you've got to figure out how to use it right. That doesn't even work. We already agreed that spiritual gifts are part of what the Bible says, and God gives us a spiritual gift that we need, that we are able to do, that is going to be good for the whole body of Christ. That's a model of justice. Yes, I'm talking about Ferguson, but I'm not. Okay, let's just say it. Because I don't need to talk about all that. Because it's only one thing. How about Cleveland? Okay, so the kid's waving a toy gun. Should he have been shot? See, we're not going to talk about that. I said it, but that's not what I'm talking about. There are so many complicating factors to what builds this culture of fear in our world, because that's what it comes down to. That's why we're talking about fear. That response that we have in this world to something we don't know. I didn't know what was going to happen to my son. I didn't know what was making that noise in my house. And I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to stay sane enough to even figure it out. There are some people who really have fear of what's going to happen next in their lives. It's not all about racism. It's financial. It's all kinds of identity issues in this world. How are we excluding people because we continue to fear something we don't know or understand? So let's go back to racism. Because I really don't like the definition that I've been given over the years, that it's racial power plus privilege or something like that. Somebody else will have a better one. But it's the idea that something we believe or do or know with our power. And some of you might be sitting in the pews and go, well, I don't have a whole lot of power in this world. You may feel that way, because I know I feel that way pretty often, that I don't have enough power to do something to change the world. And yet, simply by being able to make some basic decisions every day very easily gives you power. One example, something I never thought about in my life. If you are a person of color, you have to find a place that will be able to cut or fix your hair. Not every beauty salon you walk into. Now maybe in the DC area, there's more opportunity for that. In Moline, Illinois, you didn't walk to any beauty salon with black hair and expect somebody to be able to care for it. Cut it, condition it, perm it, whatever needs to be done, straighten it. It's something as simple as that. Now, that's not racism. It's it's part of the system of racial inequality, yes. Racial injustice. It's privilege, yes, which is part of racism, thank you. I trying to keep the definition separate, but you're right, it's part of racism. When we don't see that privilege, it's racism. It's not about how we act. Most of us day to day are going to be nice people. It's about what we don't know, which is why I've had to change my mind. Let's get back to that. I used to believe we could change our own little hearts and treat each other nicely and love one person at a time, maybe even change somebody's mind. When I got married, it was pretty painful. I came out of 2 days of conferences with a church that decided that I was no longer going to be employed there because I was getting married. And my parents initially weren't coming to the wedding. And let's see. So I no longer had a place to get married, no family, and no job. The region basically said, well, you'll still have standing. And the denomination said nothing. And the Rainbow Coalition didn't email me back. Yeah, we did all kinds of crazy things in the midst of the fear that was going on in the moment. But something came out of that, because there were families in the congregation where I served that did come to the wedding. Now, of course, they were invited, as others were not. But they came, and they shared, and they were joyful. And I used to think, you heard me say that again, right? I used to think that that was progress in dealing with racism. It's certainly good work, but it wasn't changing, here's the ugly word, the system. There's so many times that we get upset. We get upset about politics, we get upset about systems, we get upset about the bureaucracy, and yet we continue to believe we can't change that. And I'm not sure I know how to change that. I used to think changing that meant one-on-one, and I still believe it's important for us to build those relationships, but somehow we have to change the system. A personal experience. 2. One night, my husband's, before we were married, I went to pick him up from a nightclub. Now, he wasn't partying at the nightclub, he was the bouncer at his uncle's nightclub. And you know that my husband doesn't drink, smoke, gamble. Well, he does gamble, I take that back, so strike that. He likes to play poker, but he doesn't really hardly makes anything. Anyway, he was bouncing that night, and you know he's a big guy and pretty intimidating, and it works, right? And but he's actually very nonviolent in that sense too, very calm and quiet. You've seen him, you've heard him. I pulled up into the parking lot, and the police stopped me. Ma'am, are you okay? Yes, I'm fine, thank you. I mean, it's late, admittedly, but there's people around. I'm in my car. I pull into the parking spot. They come back over to me. Are you sure you're okay? And I'm like, yes, I'm picking someone up. It was an all-black club, basically. I mean, you can read between the lines. The second encounter was we were driving in my car, registered in my name, but Tim was driving, and we were pulled over. And the officer looks in and goes, ma'am, are you okay? And I'm like, these were both in Lexington, Kentucky, about 15 years ago. I'm like, yes, sir. And at this point, I'm starting to get pretty upset because these are happening a little more regularly than I like. And he kind of looks at Tim, and he looks at me, and he goes, I need to go run something. And I'm sure he's running the plate again and making sure there wasn't any reason, and took Tim's driver's license and all this kind of stuff. Never asked us to get out, thank goodness. But do we understand how that is the system? I don't believe it's the one officer being racist on a personal level. Could have been, but I don't know that. What it is a system built on fear of what the other is going to do. Fear does stuff to us. Fear changes us. Fear makes us do things we never thought we could do. And sometimes those are things we need to do. Care for our children. Save a neighbor, right? Some good things sometimes, but fear also makes us do things that aren't good for us. It makes us do things personally to our bodies that aren't good. It makes us do things in the community that aren't good. Fear of how we're going to care for our children makes us do things we never thought we would do, like stealing or lying. What would we do for our children? What would we do for a loved one who was hurting? Because that's fear, and it elicits a response. All I want us to remember this week are a few things, and I'm going to give you a couple ideas from Merton, because he's one of my go-to guys when I'm thinking about the church and spiritual life. But the other is I want to point you to a couple things. I know not everybody's on Facebook, and you don't have to be, but if you're computer savvy at all, or if you need it, I can get these printed for you. There were a couple of responses that were pretty good in connection to this week's events. I remind you that this week is not an unusual occurrence, and it's not something we should focus on. It's the underlying issues, I believe, of fear that we really need to talk about. But the NFL player, Benjamin Watson, who wrote a response of how he felt. He talks about being angry, frustrated, fearful, embarrassed, sad, sympathetic, offended, confused, introspective. Some of these will mirror what Merton says, by the way. Hopeless, hopeful, encouraged. And then if you go to the Christian Century website, you can read a blog by Bromley McClennan. I have to write that down. But What We Shall Overcome is a perspective of whites talking about things that we can overcome. And she's a younger minister to look at. And, just imagine that the thing that I sent around that Connie had seen on the Facebook was the equality versus justice, was that equality meant everybody was trying to see the baseball game, and there's a fence in front of them, and they all were standing on the same size box. But they're all different size people. So some people could see over, and some people were still under the fence. Justice, that was equality, right? Everybody had the same box. Justice was one person didn't even need a box. One needed one needed two, you understand, and whatever it is they need, so that they all could see and were level playing field. And I know that we've had all kinds of talks in the past and all kinds of legislation in the past, and I don't want us to focus on that. What can we do to make the system work? Because sometimes you just have to make the system work for you. I'm not sure we're going to get rid of the whole system. We're not going to change the whole system. How do we make the system work for us? So look at what Benjamin Watson said. Go to the Christian Century if you have time to look at some of the things that they're saying. The other thing is to go to our Disciple website. They've posted some things about reconciliation and ways to talk about reconciliation and racism and all those things that are part of the initiative of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I understand that there is a lot of fear going on when it happens. Walk down the street and you see someone hanging out on a street corner, we're going to have a little bit of fear sometimes, especially if we're alone. Getting in our car at night out in a parking lot, we're going to have some fear if someone's trying to approach us. Noises in our house, that's me. There's all kinds of things that we have fear about, and those are judgment calls of how we take care of ourselves. What we shouldn't be fearing is how we take care of each other and how we provide for each other and how we don't let the system run us, how we remember the system was made by us and we can be part of making sure that system runs better instead of just letting it run. Part of me thinks that's really what the bigger issue is. I do share with you that there was a bunch of talk. I don't know, Karen, did you see this about the prayer that Sharon Watkins wrote and posted on Facebook? And I normally don't post a lot. I share things and occasionally say happy birthday to people and that kind of stuff. I'm a little fearful of putting things in writing and being called on it. But I couldn't help myself. I posted something on Facebook. She wrote a prayer. Admittedly, the only name she offered in it was Michael Brown, but he's the one who died. Let's just remember that, okay? I understand other people are completely affected by this situation, but he's the one who did lose his life. So she offers this prayer, and she says prayer, talking about justice, I think, and talking about all of us uniting, and I should have read it for you, and I apologize. We'll read it again sometime, but look on the website. A lot of people were pretty offended that it didn't name everybody. I get it, because I think as Christians, we need to pray for everyone. I don't believe in any way that that's what she meant to do, but that's getting into politics, so you have to make your decision on that too. What drove that conversation, again, is fear. We should be praying for everybody. What I wrote is, if we were truly praying for the other, for everyone, I don't believe many of these things in the world would happen. So where is this belief that really God is with all of us? Why have we let fear run our lives? Thomas Merton once said that at the root of all war, and you can define war in lots of different ways, is fear. Not so much the fear we have of one another, but the fear we have of everything. Fear makes all of God's creatures do strange things. The disciples were filled with fear, even when Jesus was still around them. And he had to calm them down. And so there's 4 steps I offer for you of looking at how do we deal with fear. With the kids, remember we talked about turn on the lights, get somebody to help you. Those are all great things for all of us to remember. But Jesus, they're up on the mountain and they're fearful of this voice of God, right? And he's like, get up. Because they're laying on the ground, squiggling around going, I can't, no. And Jesus is like, come on now, get up. There are times when sometimes we just need somebody to say, come on now. And then after they got up, he said, come on, we're going down the mountain. You're not going to avoid life. I don't care what you've heard. You're not going to avoid. So you're going to stand up. You're going to get moving. And then the third thing he did, I think, is the one that we must pay the most attention to. He said, I have to say it this way. Shut up. He said, be silent. He said, think about it. He said, pray about it. He said, be introspective. We often want to have the first word or the last word or all the words, right? But we don't keep our mouths shut. And I think that's one reason why I don't post much on Facebook. I'm afraid once I open my mouth. Listen. Silence is about listening. It's not just about being silent and not doing anything. Silence is active. Listen. And then, of course, we are called to speak. Actually, he says yell. Yell from the mountaintops what it is that God has revealed to you. But only after you've been able to get up, get moving, listen, and then offer what you know. Because we're not going to dispel fear if we've done everything for ourselves, but not done it in community. That third part especially is in community. It's not just about me hearing my voice or me saying what I want and not listening to you. Because I'm a pretty realistic person. I didn't talk much politics today. Because I do believe that it's complicated. We're not going to fix it by one response. We're only going to fix it with all of us participating. And we're not going to participate if we're on the ground and refusing to get up. The scripture today was chosen out of Matthew 28, not because it talked about fear necessarily, although there was fear in this time. The disciples had certainly been pretty upset about what happened to Jesus and what was going to go on, and he had talked to them about fear in Matthew 17 and given them these kind of steps of getting over their fear a little bit. But they're a little upset about how to go on. They're not remembering those steps. And when we get to the end of this chapter in Matthew 28, I want us to hear the hope. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father,